But then you even get in the book of Acts where God has this vision for St. Peter and says, hey, all these other things, you can eat those too. Thank the Lord, because I love pork.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. This is episode 63, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. CooksHolsters.com. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran. Welcome to your weekly dose of faith, firearms, and freedom. A special welcome to all of those listening on KRRC 94.3 The Bridge in Rogue River, Oregon. If you like what you hear today, or if you've got any comments or questions, check out the feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. We'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voice message or send us an email. Be sure to sign up for the Reformation Gun Club. It's designed for fans of the show. It's got exclusive content, members-only discounts, and it's all just $1.50 per month. Or if you sign up for a year, it's $15.17 per year, this being the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, of course. New content coming your way every month, and I've got a lot of cool stuff coming this April, just a few days from now. And I would really appreciate it if you would support the sponsors on today's show: Lee Armory, Galloway Precision, U.S. Reloading Supply, RAE Gear USA, Guns for Gals, and of course, Cook's Holsters. You'll find banners on the website to link to their websites, and you can get special discount promo codes. Listen for those in today's show and save on your purchases for them. And be sure to tell them that you heard about it at Armed Lutheran Radio and thank them for their support. On today's show, we've got tips from Mia Anstine and Aaron Israel. Sergeant Bill is taking a week off, and we've got a fun segment with Pastor Bennett a little bit later as well. But first, wanted to share something with you, a follow-up to episode 52 back in January, our Clinging to God and Guns segment with Pastor Bennett. That episode, we were discussing an article that was written by this rather arrogant lefty Franciscan friar named Daniel Horan, and he had taken offense at a statement made by another friar, Friar Joe Klassen, that he carried a concealed handgun when he was traveling in dangerous parts of the area where he served in the St. Louis area, and Friar Horan thought this was just horrible. Friar Klassen defends his ownership, concealment, and carrying of a firearm in quote-unquote very bad areas for quote-unquote protection. In what way does he intend to use the firearm for protection? The most obvious answer is to kill or harm another human being before that person could ostensibly attempt to harm him. How is that okay, especially for a priest? So I reached out to that friar, Joe Klassen, hoping that he would come on the show and tell his side of the story. And I've had the honor of conversing with Joe back and forth by email, and although he's declined to come on the show for personal reasons, he did give me permission to set the record straight. You know, there's been a lot of talk about fake news since the election of Donald Trump, but in reality, fake news has been going on for a long time, and unfortunately, Joe Klassen was a victim of fake news himself. And Joe writes, "Thank you for your email. I remember the articles mentioned in your podcast. Those got me into all kinds of hot water with folks. The original text that those statements came from were from an interview I did with the Catholic News Service, which is a reputable organization. However, shortly after that interview, another article came out from a notoriously liberal Catholic newspaper, which had taken many of my statements totally out of context. And from there, I found my many misquoted statements all over the place in a wide variety of online publications. I hosted an outdoor-themed, nationally syndicated radio show for several years, wrote many books and articles about hunting, fishing, and the outdoors, as I still do, and was gaining quite a reputation as the, quote, outdoorsman priest priest. In the midst of all of that, many simply assumed that I was just this, quote, gun fanatic priest, and I had countless requests for interviews with journalists from all over the world. In reality, I've always primarily been a bow hunter. I shoot a gun maybe a dozen times a year, a few practice shots to make sure my skills are up par when the firearms hunting season rolls around, and then a few one-shot, one-kill rounds on animals I harvest. And having been living in Alaska for the past 5.5 years, I don't even have to bother with concealed carry issues. Heck, I rarely even carry a gun when I'm hanging around 1,000-pound Kodiak bears. I guess my point is that so much of the stuff on the internet is just such exaggerated BS. I went around and round and round with all kinds of crazy people emailing me and calling me and giving me all kinds of crap about me and my guns and hunting and all the rest. In the end, no matter if I could back up all my arguments for proper use of firearms, hunting, etc. with 100% sound arguments from science, scripture, and the official church teachings, they didn't care. The level of stupidity and denial is off the charts. I simply don't bother with such people these days or give them 1 second of my time. There's no reasoning with people who live in, quote, Disneyland and have never stepped foot in truly wild nature. Even the notion that I was a friar is 100% false. I had nothing to do with the Franciscans or monastic life. I was a diocesan priest for 10 years. So, liberals in the Catholic Church proved in this episode that they will destroy their own over politics, not over theology, over politics. And Joe Klassen was demonized for his support for the Second Amendment. Meanwhile, Friar Daniel Horan will proudly support the murder of the unborn on his personal Facebook page and in his articles, and he'll march in his cassock wearing a pink pussy hat at the Women's March. Joe Klassen left the priesthood with the blessing of the church in 2013. He's now happily married and is the owner and operator of Wild Revelation Guide Service in Alaska, living, as Joe puts it, the vocation and the life that I have no doubt that God originally called me to. I was just too stubborn to listen. Well, I want to thank Joe for reaching out and allowing us to set the record straight. He's trying to put what I'm sure was a very trying time behind him and to move on with his life, and he declined to come on the show to talk about this, and I completely understand. Joe, if you're listening, thank you. You're welcome on the show anytime you want to come on and talk about bow hunting in Alaska or anything else, as long as it's not this. Christ's blessings to you and your wife, and may he continue to comfort and guide you as you guide others into the wilds of Alaska and the beauty of God's creation there. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more with Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense right after this break. AK pattern rifles are known for their rugged reliability in all types of conditions. The best AK pattern rifles come from the desert of Arizona. Lee Armory builds AK pattern rifles using premium imported parts. Lee Armory's enhanced receivers are properly heat treated with CNC drilled trunnion and scope mount holes, Tapco triggers, polished bolt carrier and hammer, receiver rails modeled after the Saiga design to prevent bolt carrier jump, and barrels made from 4150 vanadium steel nitrided to 1200 degrees to make them harder, more durable, and more accurate. Plus, they offer a limited lifetime warranty. The AK pattern rifle is legendary for its reliability. Lee Armory takes the AK and adds a whole new level of quality and customer service. Available at Copper Custom, Classic Firearms, AIM Surplus, and Elite Ordnance, or visit leearmory.us to see the entire line of Lee premium AK rifles, optics, and accessories. Lee Armory premium AK pattern rifles, born under the Red Star, perfected in Arizona. leearmory.us.
If you carry a multi-tool or pistol magazine every day, check out RAE Gear high-quality tactical sheaths. Designed with the needs of law enforcement, military, first responders, and concealed carriers in mind, RAE Gear sheaths are made from powder-coated stainless steel, making them strong, corrosion-resistant, and lightweight. They feature a spring steel belt clip for easy deployment and removal. Your tool or magazine can be easily accessed with just one finger, and yet the integrated retention keeps your tool or magazine secure even when turned upside down. RAE Gear's tool sheaths are designed to work with a variety of Leatherman brand multi-tools, and their new line of quick deployment mag sheaths offer the same tough construction and corrosion resistance for carrying most double-stacked 9mm, 40 caliber, and 357 SIG magazines. Check out the full line of products at www.raegearusa.com and be sure to use the promo code ALR at checkout and save 10% off your order. Recognize, assess, execute. raegearusa.com.
The Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast is for people who are thinking of getting a gun and for those who already own one. Each week we invite a firearms instructor to discuss the news. At Self-Defense Gun Stories, we study responsible gun owners who protected themselves and the people they love. Were these gun owners lucky, or were they properly trained and prepared? What would you do if you were in their shoes? What should you do? Come listen at selfdefensegunstories.com.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about the old cliche of keeping your gun on your nightstand and why that's probably not the best idea. Hat tip to Grant Cunningham over at grantcunningham.com for writing the blog post over at his blog that inspired me to talk about this week. So head over to grantcunningham.com and check out his blog, and the article is called "A Gun on Your Nightstand Isn't the Best Idea, No Matter Who Says So," which I'm going to echo Grant's perspective on this. So the old cliche is that you hear the bump in the night and the bad guy comes into your house and you have to very quickly access your gun. And so the premise is that you don't want to have to be fumbling around with a quick access safe or anything like that, because you might mess up and not be able to get to your gun in time to deal with whatever the threat is that's come into your house. Now, Grant makes the point, which I echo, that if your security system for your home is so lacking that you have to worry about being awoken from a dead sleep and having a bad guy standing right over the top of you such that you can't access your defensive tools, then you've got bigger problems than you're going to be able to solve with a firearm. Let's talk about that. If a guy's able to get into your bedroom where you are when you are asleep at nighttime before you're able to A, be woken up by the fact that he's trying to break into your house or broke into your house, and B, he's right there in the room with you before you're able to access your defensive tools, then your security sucks. You don't have a very good door option there. A lot of people have just the little crappy set screws that come with the house when you put the door in that don't bolt the deadbolt into the wall and that don't bolt the back plate into the wall, and they haven't reinforced their doors or maybe put on a second deadbolt. That's your first line of defense. So if you don't have a good door and they can just easily break into it, then you've got a problem there. The second thing is that even if you don't have a very good door, if you don't hear somebody kicking in your door or have something that's going to alert you to the fact that someone is kicking in your door, then you've got issues. You don't have to buy a real expensive alarm system. I've got Simply Safe, which barely costs anything, and it's just a bunch of sensors on my doors and windows that are just going to beep at me if the doors open up in a very loud way that's going to startle me and wake me up. Now, you don't have to have something sexy that calls the police right away. Grant mentions that in his article. I think that you should. I mean, they're so inexpensive now, there's no reason not to. But the real thing is that it gives you an early warning. And even if you have dogs, I've got 2 basset hounds that if somebody's kicking in the door, it's going to wake the basset hounds up. And even though they're going to be useless as attack dogs, they're at least going to give me that early warning that something is amiss. And so if someone's able to get into the room with you before you're able to access your defensive tools, then you need to look at your home security plan altogether from a bigger perspective and fix those issues before you think about where you're staging your gun. So you should have time to get yourself awake and get over to your quick access safe and retrieve your gun. And if you've ever woken up from an alarm and hit the snooze, you know that you're kind of wonky and kind of out of it the first thing after you wake up. And if you've got your gun on your nightstand, think about some of the other things that might startle you in the middle of the night. My 6-year-old comes in and wakes us up in the middle of the night on a regular basis, whether she's had a bad dream or she just doesn't want to sleep in her bed anymore or whatever the reason is. She may come in at 2 in the morning and wake me up, and it may scare the crap out of me. Well, the last thing I want to be doing when that happens is reaching for my defensive firearm while I'm all out of it and jumbled and just woke up from a nightmare myself or whatever the case may be, and I have an accidental or negligent discharge there and end up hurting myself or killing someone or my own self in the process of fumbling around for my gun when there's really no threat at all, or even if there was a threat. So reaching for the gun outside of some kind of barrier in between you and the tool that makes you wake up a little bit is really not a great idea. Having to access it out of a quick access safe is going to force you to wake up a little bit. And we're talking about 20 or 30 seconds. And if you don't have 20 or 30 seconds to get over there, hit your quick access safe, get the gun out, get it to the ready position, then like I said, you got bigger problems. You need to look at your home defense plan from a bigger perspective and fix those things. So what would you want to reach for on your nightstand? Well, Grant makes the point that a flashlight makes a lot more sense to stage on your nightstand than a gun does, because what do you need to do before you shoot a threat? Well, you need to identify it before you even have the legal wherewithal to make the decision to shoot it. You could be making a really bad decision, and there's all kinds of stories over the past year where people have shot people who weren't really bad guys who happened to be in their house that startled them in the middle of the night for whatever reason. You don't want that to be you, so put that flashlight on your nightstand, use that to identify whatever the threat is, and if you need to use your defensive tool, you should have plenty of time to access it. If you've got a modern quick access safe that costs like $200, you hit the little fingerprint sensor or the little 3-button combo, and you've got your defensive handgun at the ready to use it whenever you need to. So I don't think it's a really good idea to stage your defensive handgun on your nightstand. I think that's movie stuff. I think it's an old cliche, and I think it needs to go away. It's 2017, and if you don't have a quick access safe to store your defensive tools in, especially if you have children in the house, or even something like tactical walls or something like that, a more clandestine way to store them, then you're really making a mistake. You don't just leave guns laying out, because if you are in that situation that you're supposedly worried about and needing access to your gun right away, the last thing you want to do is to be fumbling around with your not awake body and end up having a negligent discharge and potentially injuring or killing yourself or someone else when all you were trying to do was wake yourself up. So allow yourself the time to get woken up, get over there and get into the quick access safe, and do it that way. That's the appropriate way to stage defensive tools inside the home, and don't be the guy who leaves a gun out on your nightstand and accidentally shoots somebody who doesn't need to be shot, which could even be you or one of your family members. That's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
So how many of you have been in this situation? You hear about a gun or you read about it, you decide you want to check it out, you go and you try it out at a gun show or at your local gun store, and you decide to buy. Maybe it feels really good in your hand, the price is right, the size is perfect, but then you take it to the range and the trigger is awful. Now you've got that gun that you've invested your time and your money in, but you don't like to shoot it. So you either trade it, maybe you try to sell it and hope that you can make some of your money back, or you grin and bear it. Well, what if I told you that you can get the performance that you wanted out of the gun that you already have? Galloway Precision makes trigger conversion kits for a wide range of guns to produce smoother, lighter, better functioning triggers. Galloway Precision is your carry pistol specialist. Check out their complete collection of performance parts at gallowayprecision.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. Make the gun that you choose to carry better with precision parts from gallowayprecision.com.
The percentage of women who own guns is growing. American women are more knowledgeable and better equipped to defend themselves than ever before. So, why is it that every time I go to a gun shop, I feel like they're talking down to me? Like, hey little lady, let me show you what you need. It's like all they want to do is sell me a pink gun. If you're tired of feeling that too, visit Guns for Gals, a specialty firearms boutique designed to empower women with information about firearm safety and to equip them with the means to protect themselves. The owners go out of their way to find products specifically for women, and they actually listen and ask questions to help you find the right products to meet your needs. If they wouldn't own it themselves, they won't sell it. Guns for Gals is located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. Open Monday 1 to 6 and Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7. And on weekends, you can find them at a gun show near you. Or shop online at www.gunsforgals.com. Guns for Gals, more than just a gun shop. It's how gun shopping should be.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hello again, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic week. I actually have been having a pretty good week myself. I was just scrolling through the timeline on Facebook and I saw something that Lloyd had posted about some guy and his wife, and I had no clue what he was talking about. And my not knowing about this news got me to thinking that I used to know everything that was going on in the news. And maybe this is news, maybe it isn't news. I don't know. It got me to thinking about social media, and it got me to reflecting back on my own social media sites. I used to manage social media for an organization, and I don't have to do that anymore. So I don't have to be online every day, which is indeed a blessing, because as I think of not scrolling through news feeds very much anymore, it really leads me back to 2016 and the politics of the presidential election. I really found that election frustrating, and it felt like it caused anxiety. So I kind of pulled back from being on social media. I used to chit-chat a lot, and I used to share quite a bit. And nowadays, I share some daily inspirations, I share news, I share different things I find in press releases about conservation and wildlife, and maybe shooting sports and events like that. As I thought back, I thought about last summer when I had the impression that once the presidential election was done, all this bad news would subside and go away. The negativity would quit. Well, lo and behold, now we have President Trump, and we have the left screaming and crying, and we have the right jumping up and down, and we have all this stuff going on, and the news, quite honestly, is not generally very good news. It's not happy. If I even attempt to scroll through the timeline on social media sites, it's never something that's uplifting. So since that's what I'm seeing on my social media feeds, it's obviously why I don't go there anymore, because it's not a positive experience. It's not happy, and I like sharing happy things. Thinking about these things also got me to thinking about a press conference that I attended last winter while I was at SHOT Show. And I've talked about SHOT Show before. It's put on by the National Shooting Sports Foundation, also known as NSSF. So they, in conjunction with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which is the AFSP, they put on a seminar about suicide prevention. And there were some interesting statistics as well as pamphlets that they gave us that included things to do and so forth. But I wanted to share a couple statistics with you right off, because we all shoot guns and we obviously have a positive attitude toward them, but we also need to consider what the anti-gun people are looking at and what they're showing people. The AFSP, in conjunction with the NSSF, shared this. Of all firearms-related deaths in the U.S. in 2015, almost 2/3 were suicide deaths, according to the 2015 Fatal Injury Report, Center for Disease Control and Prevention. 2/3 of firearms deaths are of suicide. That means the anti-gun, they're portraying that it's murder and mass shootings. And obviously the numbers that they are dispatching are incorrect or misleading. And there we go again with those news headlines in the social media feeds. But I also wanted to share in their report, they said of all suicide deaths in our nation, in the U.S., nearly 50% of suicides are by firearm. The NSSF and AFSP reports also cited some important points about suicide. They said that more than 50 research studies worldwide have found that certain types of news coverage can increase the likelihood of suicide in vulnerable individuals. They say the magnitude of the increase is related to the amount and duration and prominence of news coverage. So there is that bad news in our timelines. We've got to get rid of that. They set a bold goal to reduce the annual suicide rate to 20% by 2025. That is outstanding, and it's really a great thing to hear that they are trying to do something positive, not just for the firearms industry, but to save lives. So that is just awesome news. And I wanted to share that with you because it's good news. Another thing that I wanted to share with you is a little bit of suggestions. So the organizations, they gave some information about how to handle things on media. So since I do write and give podcasts and do videos, they gave suggestions of headlines and such and so forth. But they also gave us some helpful sidebar stories. And one sidebar is warning signs of suicide. And I thought I would share this because we all need to know the signs. And even though we're not psychologists, we do have friends. I have friends that are on the liberal left that are really quite upset, and it's really disheartening to see them stressed out over a presidential election, even though their day-to-day lives seem to be continuing as they once were. So the warning signs of suicide: talking about or wanting to die, looking for a way to kill oneself, talking about feeling hopeless or having no purpose, talking about feeling trapped or unbearable in pain, talking about being a burden to others, increasing their use of alcohol or drugs, acting anxious, agitated, or recklessly, sleeping too little or sleeping too much, withdrawing or feeling isolated, showing rage or talking about seeking revenge on others, displaying extreme mood swings. They say the more of these signs a person shows, the greater the risk. Warning signs are associated with suicide, but they may not be what causes the suicide. Here is what you can do if you notice these signs. If you or someone exhibits warning signs of suicide, do not leave that person alone. Remove any firearms, alcohol, drugs, and sharp objects that could be used in a suicide attempt. Call the U.S. Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Take the person to an emergency room or seek help from a medical or mental health professional. All of this is really helpful in us being aware of others, and that's something in this day and age. A lot of people are so self-focused they forget about others. So as you head out and do your errands and head to work today, think of 1 Corinthians 16:14. Do everything in love. And I will look for some happiness in the news feeds here shortly. Have a good one. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstine.com.
As many of you know, Sergeant Bill and I are competitive shooters. We're also reloaders. Bill helped me to get started last year, but I've still got a lot to learn. One thing I do know, though, you need a good source for supplies and components. So let me tell you about U.S. Reloading Supply. Yeah, there are bigger suppliers out there, but what sets U.S. Reloading Supply apart from the rest is their dedication to customer satisfaction. Check them out at usreloadingsupply.com. They carry the top name brands like Starline, Rainier, Barry's, Remington, Spear, and Hornady. If you've got a special order like primers and powder that you don't see on their website, give them a call for a quote. I did and got a great price. Excellent customer service, fast delivery, prices that include shipping, and a promise to match or beat any retailer's price, including shipping. Call them today, 941-451-7357, or visit them today at usreloadingsupply.com and use the promo code Lutheran2017 to save 10% off your order. usreloadingsupply.com.
Hey, this is Weird from the Gun Blog Variety Cast, reminding you that this podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the other great podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
If you carry a gun for personal protection, it's imperative that you get a good holster. When I started out, I had no idea what that meant, and I went through a bunch of really bad holsters. Then I found Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. Cook's Holsters are custom made to fit your specific firearm. Available in lots of colors, including custom printed Kydex. Cook's Holsters are made in the USA and the great state of Georgia and come with a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get a 15% discount off everything in the store. You put a lot of time and money into the firearm you choose to carry for personal protection. Carry it in the best holster. cooksholsters.com.
Up next, we're clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for Clinging to God and Guns and another visit with our good friend, Pastor John Bennett, pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, this week we're looking at a video from a YouTube channel called Faith and Firearms Project, and this was founded several years ago by a Dr. Michael Chan, who is an assistant professor of Old Testament at Luther Seminary in Minnesota, up in St. Paul, I think. He doesn't look like your typical Old Testament prof. My dad is an Old Testament prof, and that's kind of the picture I have in my head. But this guy looks like he's fresh out of high school.
He looks like he's younger than I am, and I'm a pretty young guy.
He's got that whole Asian youthfulness thing going on. He's got the Dragon Ball Z haircut, and from what I can tell, he started this channel to explore guns and faith, sort of what I set out to do when I started the blog back in 2012. He's got lots of interviews with people on all sides of this issue. And like we were saying before we started, it's really refreshing because he doesn't seem to take a side. He just sort of asks questions and sits back and lets people tell their stories and explain their positions. It's not confrontational, so there's a lot of good stuff here for us to dig into. Unfortunately, it looks like the project is dead because it's down to about 70 subscribers. And there's nothing, and nothing's been posted in over a year. So for all intents and purposes, I think the project has run its course. But what we've chosen today is an interview from 2015 with a Lutheran pastor, an ELCA Lutheran pastor named John Tellier. He's the pastor at, if I pronounced this incorrectly, I apologize, Geezy Town Newry Evangelical Lutheran Parish in Pennsylvania. And the video is entitled Masculinity, Guns, and the Church. Now, the first part of the interview revolves around the pastor's views on the changing views on masculinity. We find out the pastor loved contact sports in high school and college, like football and lacrosse. He liked to hit people, and now he likes to crochet.
I wonder if he makes hats for the Women's March.
I wondered about that too. But about 10 minutes in, finally, Dr. Chan sort of steers the conversation to the intended subject, which is guns. And we find out that Pastor Tellier's parish seems to be fairly rural. There's a lot of hunters and law enforcement officers in his congregation. They talk about open carry in church. It's a subject that we're not going to, I don't have any clips because we've discussed this in a previous episode, and I would encourage you to go back and check that out. That was in episode 59 where Pastor Bennett and I talked about the subject of guns in church. We find out that Pastor Tellier is not unfamiliar with guns. He grew up with guns in the house. His dad was a police officer. His grandfather was a hunter, but he was always involved in sports, so he never really got into guns. So he's not a gun guy, but he doesn't seem to be ideological about it. He definitely doesn't understand gun culture, though, and about 17 minutes into the interview, that becomes really clear when he's asked about the discussions in his church following some of the high-profile shootings, and he offers us this.
Guns here are really a sign of being an American, in my analysis. So to be an American means to own a gun. And so when there's talks about gun control in any shape or form, it's always where the government's going to come in and take all of our guns away. We're not going to be able to protect our families. We have a right to bear arms. And so it's a reaction of, I think, a deeper symptom of this is who we are as Americans, and this is our right as an American. I've heard, you don't take away my faith, my family, and my guns. And I just thought, oh, okay. I don't think that's what they're hoping to do.
I wonder if he's a little bit naive to the hard left's agenda right there. Because you look at, there's this cultural Marxism that's becoming pretty prevalent with the far left, where that's exactly what they want to do. They want to take away your faith, your firearms, and your freedom.
And the Lutheran church body that he's a member of, it makes that fairly clear.
Right.
The resolutions that they have passed, they are very much in favor of gun bans and confiscation. They're not mincing words about that.
Right. And and I don't know where he himself falls politically, but let's face it, the ELCA is an SJW church body.
Yes.
But to address what he's saying, that and this is, his culture where he lives identifies owning firearms as being an American. Look at the Second Amendment and the purpose of the Second Amendment, that it was to preserve our freedoms. So, and I don't think there's anyone who's suggesting you're not an American if you don't own a firearm.
Right. I think that probably betrays more of a misunderstanding of gun owners and gun culture and probably his own congregation, really. I don't think he knows really understands the people in his own congregation.
Right, which is a little sad.
Yeah, it is. And next, he's asked about his personal reaction to what he perceives as this faith and firearms mentality that he sees in his own church.
Inside, I guess for me, it comes down to a theology of abundance versus a theology of scarcity. So a theology of abundance is that for me is we have been blessed by God and we have what we need. God provides us the things, maybe not everything we want. I mean, I would love my paycheck to be $1 million, but that probably isn't gonna happen anytime soon. But coming from a view that God will provide, that God is with us, that no matter what comes, God will always be there, providing His grace and His mercy. The other end would be a scarcity of, is God with us? I guess is the major question of, we don't have what we need. We're always striving for more. God blesses some and God condemns others. And we don't want to be on the side of which God condemns. And so, for me, the gun debate really hinges on that, of how do you feel about God?
What do you make of that? The theology of abundance versus a theology of scarcity.
There's within some theological circles, there's this, it seems to be this desire to try and come up with new stuff. So somewhere about 5-8 years ago, somebody came up with these new terms, the theology of scarcity and the theology of abundance. They're just made up things. They have nothing to do with Scripture. So let's just get that out of the way. It's one of those things where people just come up with new stuff so they can write books about it and make money. It seems to be the whole purpose. But the whole idea is that, theology of scarcity, there isn't enough to go around, so I've got to hold on to what I have. And I've got to accumulate as much as I have. And I guess the quote-unquote gun nuts, I like to jokingly call myself a certifiable gun nut sometimes, that we try and get as much as we can, because at some point someone is going to try and take these things away from us. Well, maybe there's a little bit of that going on. The theology of abundance says there's plenty to go around, so we'll just, God is going to provide an abundance, so let's just let Him provide an abundance. It really... And I don't know if you could say maybe these are made up terms as well, but you've probably heard the terms theology of the cross and theology of glory. Mm-hmm. And we do see these things play out quite well among a lot of evangelicals, the theology of glory, that if you have enough faith, you're going to have everything you want. The theology of the cross is what Christ teaches, that because you have faith in Him, there's going to be sufferings along the way. But within this whole construct between the theology of abundance and the theology of scarcity, what's caught in the middle, and I don't know if he's even realizing this, and again, here's that great quote from Luther that I mentioned an episode or two back, that the theology of abundance goes into that whole thing of, sitting on your couch waiting for a roasted chicken to fly into your mouth. Not going to happen.
Right.
God provides for us through means, and if we ignore those means, you had said with that story of the guy on the rooftop with the floodwaters rising, and here comes 2 boats and a helicopter, and he's just sitting there saying, nope, God's going to provide for me. Right. That's the danger of having this kind of a mindset.
Right. So those who have guns and they trust in their guns, they just don't believe God's going to provide for them. And if you have a theology of abundance and you believe that God is going to provide, then you don't need a gun because He's going to protect you.
That seems to be kind of what he's arguing here. And it's kind of a naive argument too, because, except for very limited circumstances within the Old Testament, as well as, you have the stories in the New Testament where Jesus feeds the multitudes with just a handful of items, a few loaves and fishes. Mm-hmm. You have the Old Testament Israel in the wilderness where God provides them manna, He provides them quail and so forth. Yes, God's going to provide in very certain circumstances. And when we look at all the things that we have in our lives, that is God providing for us. But to say that, this theology of abundance is just relying that God is going to take care of you. He's going to take care of you, but that doesn't mean you're just going to sit on your backside and wait for things to fall into your lap. Right. That's the risk that a person runs with holding on to this idea of this quote-unquote theology of abundance.
Well, next he expresses his belief that if it's your time to die, there's just nothing you can do about it.
My own personal feeling is if someone really wants to kill me, they will kill me. I know that. I mean, working with a dad who was a state police officer, and he told my brother and I, he goes, if people really want you dead, anyone will kill you. And that was really comforting, being 16 years old, having your dad basically tell you that if someone wants you dead, you're going to be dead. But I know that earth is not my final resting place. That through the waters of baptism, I've been claimed by a gracious, all-loving God, and that whether I die today, whether I die tomorrow, that my home is with God.
Now, he gets it right at the end, but that at the beginning was just horrifying. I can't imagine a parent telling their kids this. Dad's a burnt-out old cop who just is...
It's like I picture some guy, in his wife beater and boxer shorts, smoking a cigarette and beer in his hand, saying, kid, if it's your time, you're dead.
Well, what does that say about those people who did have guns and successfully defend their lives? Are they thwarting the will of God, or did they just not trust God enough? Like the concealed carrier in Arizona who stopped that guy who was beating a cop to death in the street. Should he have just let him leave the police officer to his fate, because that's it was his time?
Or if you go with this whole theology of abundance, you stand back and say, "Okay, God, take care of him.
Take care of him.
I got this pistol on my hip, but I'm letting you take care of him because that's your work."
That's right.
One of my the pastors out here that's a good friend of mine, he has this little saying where he says, God's a Lutheran. He works through means. And there is some truth to that God works through what he provides for us. He works through other people to take care of us, right. So that we don't go through life with this naive mindset that whatever happens, happens. Mm-hmm. Now, we can live each day in the trust of the Lord that he is going to take care for us. But it's very naive to have this fatalist mindset that, hey, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If that's our mindset, then we may as well not lock our doors. We may as well put a sign out in front of our house that says, I'm ready for the good Lord to take me, so get what you want from my house. Yep.
We would never say this about anything else, cancer or car accidents or major injuries, but for some reason, some people, when it comes to guns, will take this lazy, lay down and die attitude. But we would absolutely never, ever say this sort of thing about, hey, there's a cancer patient. Well, it's your time to die. And just leave it in God's hands. No, we're going to fight and we're going to try to survive and change that outcome because God gave us means to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, you wouldn't go and order a car from the dealership and say, I'd like the seat belts and airbags to be optional.
Right.
Not that they would do that even if you asked them, but there has to be an element of common sense here where you stop and say, okay, God's going to take care of me. When my time comes, it's my time, but let's not help my time arrive any sooner than it has to. Because you can look at this to the far extreme that, all right, I'm going to die when it's my time. Why don't I just pull out my pistol, put it to my temple, pull the trigger, and see what happens?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You take this argument to the logical extreme, and it gets kind of scary.
It does. It gets very scary.
So now we go back to Pastor Tellier is going to try to explain those people who support gun rights, this theology of scarcity. It's really just driven by fear.
When people say, well, people aren't going to take away my faith, my family, my guns, it's really starting from the other perspective of, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to beat you as the other person. I'm going to have the most guns, and kind of whoever has the most guns wins. And I don't know anyone with 28 hands, so I don't know why you need 28 guns. Unless you're Rambo, just firing them all at the same time. But
does Rambo have 28 arms?
I gotta stop him right there. That's just. Why do we have more than one pair of shoes? Do you have more than 2 feet? I mean, I've got more
I
than
have
one.
a sock drawer with multiple pairs of socks.
Why do I have more than one chair in my house? I've only got one butt. I mean, this just shows you how little he really knows about gun people and about guns, or how little he understands them. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to be nice here, but this is just stupid.
Yes, just like you mentioned shoes. Just like you have different pairs of shoes. Right now I'm wearing my comfortable slippers. I also have a couple pairs of boots. I've got some dress shoes. I've got some tennis shoes. You have different pairs of shoes for different purposes. When it comes to firearms, people have different kinds of firearms for different purposes. I'm not going to go shoot trap with a .22 pistol.
Certainly would make it more challenging.
Right. Just like, I'm not going to go shoot IDPA with, my AK-47. That would be fun, though. That would really be fun.
That would be awesome. Oh, my goodness. So Dr. Chan then asks him, well, suppose you're talking to somebody who believes that guns make you safer, because there's a point at which the pastor says he does not believe guns make you safer. What would you tell them to help them understand your position? And the pastor explains his concept of safety.
Safety for me is a communal activity that building strong communities based on trust is where safety comes from. Safety is not a single player game. Even though I love John Wayne and love his movies, it's not a John Wayne approach to being safe. We really need safety in our communities and looking out for each other. That's what builds safety, not having this approach of, well, I have a firearm and so now I'm safe.
What the heck does John Wayne have to do with defense and safety?
And immediately I think of that scene from Full Metal Jacket. Is this you, John Wayne? Is this me?
Safety based on community and trust.
And
not having...
those are all great things, but at the same time, there is a wealth of empirical data that demonstrates that firearms are a very effective implement in preserving and protecting life.
Mm-hmm.
If this was the mindset, then why do we arm our police officers?
Right. Why do we need police officers if the community?
Yeah, exactly.
If the community can do
we
it.
Just have, and that's almost that's like with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. That was one of the things that they were arguing for was community self-policing. And we don't need these police officers anymore. We'll just police ourselves. I'd like to see how well that would go over in places like New Orleans or Chicago or Oakland.
Right. I was just going to say, this building community doesn't happen overnight. You can't rely on a community that doesn't exist. If you go move into a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, just wait and see how that community comes to protect you.
Yeah.
I mean, just the other day, where was this? I think it was maybe in Cleveland. You had a video on Facebook of a gang rape of a teenage girl, and 40 people on Facebook watched and didn't call police. We've got these.
I didn't hear about that.
Yes.
It's horrific.
It is horrible. And we carry around these amazing devices that allow us to connect to other people in ways that our parents and previous generations they couldn't have imagined. And yet, as a community, as a society, we're more disconnected than ever.
Right.
And we're bending over backwards as a society to give predators access to women's bathrooms and locker rooms, or in the case in Maryland, where these 2 illegal immigrant kids, were enrolled as freshmen and put into schools with 14-year-olds and then ended up raping and sodomizing a girl in a bathroom at the school. How does any of that stuff make us safe? Where's our community when government is doing its dead level best to put us all at risk?
Yeah. And so somehow, because of this concept of community that looks out for each other, which I grew up in a neighborhood where people looked out for each other. It was great, even though it wasn't the safest area to be growing up in. At the same time, I hate to bring this up because some people get tired of hearing it. Maybe not in your audience, but it's like Wayne LaPierre said, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, if you've got some guy running a rampage through your neighborhood, you want to stop them. Mm-hmm. Just because you have people that look out for each other doesn't mean that suddenly you're going to be safe. Ask the people in London.
Oh, yeah.
one of the most, I mean, you have an entire nation that's a gun-free zone. Ask them how that worked out for them.
Right. Well, and I would rather live in a community of gun people, because I know that if something happens in my neighborhood, I can count on my neighbors. My neighbors will back me up rather than stand around and take videos. I know that.
Right, absolutely.
But as Aaron Israel talked about this in one of his segments several months back, you got to kind of build a community around you. You do have to get to know your neighbors as a means of building, as a self-defense strategy, so that you are looking out for each other. But it just doesn't happen overnight. It takes going out and meeting people and getting to know them. And it's nice if one of you has a gun.
And hopefully there's a guy in your neighborhood that has 28 guns, because then there's enough to go around.
Exactly.
Because Lord knows he only has 2 arms, so he can only shoot 2 at a time unless he's Rambo.
Right. Well, here on this next clip, this is where I wish Dr. Chan would break with this collegiality thing that he does and maybe get a little more confrontational and question a little more, because this is where Pastor Tellier's ignorance just sort of shows up, where he starts to talk about things he doesn't know anything about.
You know, what happens if it goes off when it shouldn't? What happens if it's not clean properly and you're not trained properly?
So to put the best construction on that little bit, he simply doesn't know what he's talking about guns. He assumes that people who own guns, that they don't get training, that they're not as smart as he is, so they don't know how to clean their guns, or that they won't go out and seek out training. He just doesn't seem to understand gun people.
And certainly there's plenty of those people out there.
Yes.
But yeah, there's plenty of gun owners out there that give your normal, responsible gun owners a bad name, but it's not the norm. It's the exception to the rule. Yeah, we encourage people to go out and get training. And if you can't get training, self-educate as much as you can, reading and practicing and so forth.
Right.
Don't just buy a gun and say, all right, I've got a gun. I'm not going to bother practicing with it. As long as I've got a gun, I'm safe. That is, that's not the mindset of your typical responsible gun owner.
Right. And we also know that every single day, people without a speck of training somehow successfully defend themselves with a firearm.
Right.
Aaron Israel brings this up a lot of times in conversation about constitutional carries. Like, I'm all in favor of getting rid of the licensing process, because people seem to think that little class that they take for 4 or 5 hours or 8, depending on the state that you're in, is training. And it's not. Just let people carry guns like the Constitution says they can, and then those who will seek training or want to seek training will, just like they do now.
Here's a fantastic idea if you want to try and bring more safety into the picture. And I don't know if you could do this legislatively, but you come out with just a simple agreement. You go buy your gun from a retailer. That retailer partners with local instructors, that you get a 10-15% discount by buying this firearm to go get training. And by that way, you're encouraging people to better themselves so that they're prepared if a threat presents itself. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the courses that you take for concealed carry, here in Minnesota, you spend 4 hours talking about the law and when it's justified to draw your firearm and shoot. And then you go and demonstrate that you can put 8 out of 10 rounds on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at 7 yards. Mm-hmm. I can dang near do that with my eyes closed if I know where the target's at.
And then they walk away from that thinking that they've gotten training. And what they really need is just, let's let people carry guns, and then those who want to seek out training will get training. Going back to this argument that the pastor's trying to make here about, they shouldn't rely on guns because guns can malfunction. Guns go off by themselves. No, they don't. Guns can malfunction if you don't maintain them. That's true, but if we apply that logic to every other part of our lives, why would we put smoke detectors in our homes? Because, the battery might go dead. Or why would we get a fire extinguisher? Because if you don't take those and get them maintained regularly, they might not work. Again, it's this, we apply this wacky logic to guns, but we wouldn't apply it in other parts of our lives.
Right. Well,
the next question is interesting. The pastor's response is spot on, so it's a little bit of a contradiction. This is where he really starts to waffle. He goes back and forth contradicting himself when he talks about guns here.
Guns are tools, and guns are necessary. I'm not here to make the argument that guns aren't necessary, but guns should be used as tools. Unfortunately, there are people in our society that want to inflict damage on others, and they're a tool that the state and local police officers use. I also know farmers. My brother, his father-in-law is a farmer, and when he's out in the field and he owns 6,000 acres, he has to carry a sidearm. That's just for his own safety. If he'd come up on a wild animal, a snake, something that would pose a threat. So guns are really tools in which we use the same way that you might use a chef's knife or a butter knife or a car. They're tools in which we use to provide safety.
Didn't he just nuke his whole argument about guns not making us safe?
I guess so. I gotta hand it to him, though, because granted the ELCA is a very liberal church body, but he sounds like he could be easily swayed to our side with just a little more education.
Yeah.
Guns are tools. It's not some inanimate object that's inherently evil, as we are hearing time and time again from the left.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he's done a lot of critical thinking on this. I don't think he recognizes how contradictory his positions or his thoughts are on this. So I agree. I think he could probably be fairly easily swayed if you sat down and said, all right, now think about what you just said here. And Dr. Chan doesn't do this, doesn't challenge his assertions or his thoughts. So he's able to contradict himself one statement after another and still think that he's being consistent. And I'm not saying that he's doing this maliciously or this is something that he's trying to be, he's not your typical anti-gunner. He just does not have, I don't think, a very good depth of knowledge about guns and about gun owners. So he makes a statement that he doesn't think guns make us safe. And then he says, well, guns are a tool to keep us safe. And then he'll go back in a minute and he'll say something completely contradictory again. And he thinks he's being consistent all the way through. So I think you're right. I think he's just a little bit naive and not well informed.
Yeah, it almost seems as if he's arguing that guns are great tools for police to use to protect us, or for people in specific situations like his brother's father-in-law who has 6,000 or however many acres it was. Mm-hmm. But let's look at this critically. Police can't be in every place all the time. There's approximately one police officer for every 400 people in the country. Mm-hmm. There's no way that there can possibly be enough police officers to thwart every single situation. That's why we have 3 million cases on average a year where people use firearms in self-defense. So let's be encouraging everyone to do the responsible thing and protect themselves, because, if you leave it up to the police officers, chances are you're going to be dead before they get there.
Right.
But I guess if it's just your time to die, let it happen.
Right. And again, no knock on police officers here. They're, like you said, they cannot be everywhere at once. And so the majority of the time, and police officers will tell you this, majority of the time they get there too late to actually stop the crime. They're actually there to collect evidence and to try to apprehend somebody after the crime's been committed. All right, so he goes right back to this symbol of being an American shtick with this next comment.
For my own community, it's a symbol. Again, it's a symbol of being American. So, you got to have a gun. There's rights about cultural rights about getting your first buck. I mean, they put it in the newspaper. For me, I think you can be an American without having a gun. That's where it puts a little of the oh gosh, who is this guy? And my identity as an American is questioned, or as a man. So that's when I pull out my crocheting needles and just start going.
So as you can see, he's really confused here. He goes from it's guns don't make us safe, the community makes us safe, to guns are a tool for safety, to right back to guns are all about being an American and you don't have to have a gun to be an American thing. And
I'm going to sit here in the corner with my crochet needles.
Yes, exactly. Take what you want, I'm crocheting. Again, to me, just more evidence that he doesn't understand his congregation or the community that he lives in very well, who have a gun culture that he's in the middle of and clearly doesn't understand.
Right. Right. And it's not something that people identify with as being an American. It's just something simply people identify with as being a gun owner.
What we see as American is and what guns symbolize, I think, to us in large part, if you want to talk in symbolic sense, that they symbolize a self-determination, a right of self-defense. That the government, we don't have to rely on government for our protection and for our livelihoods.
Right. And if you look at, the founding fathers, as we've discussed in the past, that they saw the average citizen as part of the quote-unquote militia, that it was the responsibility of individual citizens to defend the country against tyranny.
Right.
And that tyranny comes in many forms. And sometimes that tyranny comes in the form of the government itself,
yep.
As it did with the Revolutionary War. And there's nothing to guarantee that there won't be some sort of Revolutionary War where we throw off, a despotic government in our own country either.
Right.
But that was the entire purpose for the Second Amendment. So, and I guess if you look at it from that perspective, then you can say, yeah, there is something about owning a firearm that's definitively American.
All right. So next they discuss carrying guns in church, and the pastor thinks that this is going to become more of an issue in the coming years, and it has. Again, this was recorded back in 2015, but it hasn't become an issue for the reasons that he thinks.
There's kind of a sense of government really kind of harping down on guns. And I think as that pressure increases, then the church is going to feel a pressure, and people are going to want to, people might, I shouldn't make a generalization, but they may want to show that their American heritage by wearing a gun to church.
Now, again, to me, that's just another statement showing you how little he understands his congregants. I mean, he hears all this talk about rights and about government intrusion on liberty, and he thinks that carrying a gun in church is because people want to show off being an American.
It reminds me of that episode where we went through the article or that video by that Minneapolis pastor with their, the hero with his cocky swagger.
That's right.
The kind of guys that want to walk around with a pistol on their hip for the world to see, they are a limited amount of people. They are a strange breed, and most responsible gun owners wish those kinds of people just either go away or just get the idea that they're not helping.
Exactly. I mean, here in Texas, we dealt with the open carry yahoos for several years and I wrote about it on the blog a number of times because they just keep giving us a bad name. They'd show up at a restaurant, armed to the teeth. They'd wander around downtown Austin with ARs, strapped over their shoulders, which is legal, but quite frankly, stupid. That may ruffle some feathers, but to walk in and pose in a Starbucks with an AR-15 and a shotgun and all this stuff, it doesn't help. It's just it makes us look stupid.
Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right.
I can walk into Walmart in flip-flops and my skivvies, and it might be legal, but it's not a good idea. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful.
Just because you can do it doesn't mean it's a great idea.
Although I have shoveled snow in my shorts before.
Well, that's just because you're from Minnesota. You live in Minnesota. That's people down here just can't picture that. Well, we can't picture shoveling snow either.
The YouTube clip does talk about masculinity, so, it just tells you how manly I am.
That's right. Maybe Pastor Tellier could knit you some shorts. All right, so finally he says at the end that he's got his own views about guns, but he's willing to listen and be open and to be, as he puts it, to be transformed by talking to the other side. So he seems very sincere. He just seems uninformed. And if you look at his Facebook page, he doesn't seem to be a political guy. So if you had a chance to talk to him and change his mind, what would you say, having heard this interview, what would you say to Pastor Tellier to help him better understand gun culture and people who own guns?
Well, it's interesting because when this interview was recorded, it was only about 5-6 weeks later that the Charleston church shooting took place. He had talked about how uncomfortable it would be for people to have guns in church. if the good guys are the ones with the guns, I'm okay with that. But just to get to change his perspective on this is look at it from the aspect of Christian freedom. There's nothing in God's word that prohibits a person from purchasing firearms. There's nothing that prohibits them from purchasing more than two, since he thinks that since you only have two arms, you only need two guns. But, I think that he is coming at this from a position, you can tell he's given it some careful thought, but I don't think he's given it adequate amount of research to really take a look at the statistics of how often firearms are very instrumental in saving lives. We don't hear about even a very slim percentage of these cases on the news because our media is very anti-gun. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be putting forward a narrative that actually suggests that firearm ownership is a good thing. But look at the crime statistics, that there have been millions of cases throughout the years where a firearm has saved a person's life. And if we're going to be a pro-life people, and granted the ELCA is not a pro-life church body, but if we're going to be a pro-life people as the people of God, then we should embrace any instrument that can be used to defend, protect, and preserve life.
Yeah. Well, Pastor, thank you for being here again. I think that's going to wrap this one up.
It was a pleasure. And, I like this guy. And I think, that if he got into a room with you and I and a couple other guys,
and a beer,
and a few beers, we might be able to bring him over to our side. I think he's almost there.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a case of a guy who, like you said, he's thought about it, but I don't think he's very well read and very well informed about it.
Right.
Probably seen the guys with the guns on their hips at Starbucks and doesn't think very highly of them, as we don't. But if he, like you said, if he sat down with people like you and me over a beer, I think we could sway him.
There is hope.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Tune in again next week for another episode of Clinging to God and Guns with Pastor John Bennett, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week for another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. Thank you to all of my contributors, Aaron Israel, Mia Anstine, Pastor John Bennett, and of course, Sergeant Bill Silvia. He'll be back with us next week. And thank you, dear listener, for joining us, for downloading and subscribing. Be sure to check out the feedback page. Leave us a message, a comment, or a question if you'd like to respond to anything you heard here today or have questions for members of the cast. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.